So it's been 6 months there or thereabouts since the Glazers said they were looking for strategic investment opportunities, whatever the statement said. And now the final round of bidding has happened. Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani and the 9-2 Foundation, they put in it's been reported as a world record bid for Manchester United. Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe, they've put in their revised bids. I'm here for, I think, the ninth time, maybe the eighth time. I always forget how many times it is, Ben, seriously, to speak to Ben Jacobs, because, Ben, I need you to help me understand everything that's gone on in this last day, and to help everybody watching as well understand the full kind of, as much as we possibly can, about the structure of these bids and what we're expecting over the next week or so. Because it's been a little bit of a, I don't think it's been that slow a process. It's been painful because it's been blow by blow every single day. We've kind of gone through it, but we're hoping to hear within the next week as to what the Glazers want to do. And Ben, bring me some good news.
Well, I think you're right in what you say, that we will get clarity in May, uncertainty in April, excitement and offers, of course, around Valentine's Day originally. So things will resolve, but it's still quite an open-ended process. And one of the most interesting things in the last 24 hours that I reported was that the deadline on Friday evening was only for two groups, Sheikh Jassim and Sir Jim Ratcliffe. And that can be taken as a clear indication that the first priority is to work out whether there is a viable group to either sell to outright or hand over a controlling stake to. And then from there, everything else is either on the back burner or will be revisited after a sale has either been determined or ruled out. And that will be the next step.
I think to begin this chat, Ben, let's quickly summarize everything that did actually happen on Friday for that deadline. So we know that Sheikh Jassim and the 9-2 Foundation and Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe both submitted revised bids, didn't they? This is the final round of bidding. We're not expecting a fourth round, are we?
No, but within a next step, should a preferred bidder be named, there's always scope to negotiate, but it's a different type of talk that would take place, because you would be haggling and finessing over a deal and obviously at the same time doing all of the other elements required to complete a transaction, which, if it's a controlling owner or majority owner, will take a matter of weeks and beyond. And that can be owners and directors test, it can be transfer of funds, it can be satisfying UEFA. And this is where the process is transactionally backwards, because the extra stage is allowed for a lot of due diligence to be done earlier, as is the fact that Manchester United is a publicly listed company. So in theory, a deal should be closer to being signed now, even though we've not had an exclusive period. And maybe there won't even be an exclusive period, but if there is one, it will be short. So all of that says the next step can still have a bit of haggling, but will be quicker. And this is why the groups still believe that they can get in before the transfer window opens. But I think what complicates it is the staggered process, which is two groups are trying to take a controlling stake, and one of them wants the football club outright. And then if they're not successful, we will then turn to either a no sale or the minority groups.
You're not allowed to say that. We're not mentioning no sale. We're not even entertaining the concept, even though it is. You can't rule it out at this point, as much as I would.
Remember, though, no sale doesn't necessarily mean no sale. No sale effectively means delaying putting any kind of new owner in place because a valuation wasn't hit. It doesn't mean that they won't put the club on the market at a future date, but because this isn't eBay and a listing where nobody bid, so then you relist it immediately, they would obviously have to wait a longer period of time. And also any of the suitors currently involved would feel a bit underwhelmed. So if we got to no sale, it wouldn't go direct now because of the staggered deadline for two and then the rest of the groups waiting. It wouldn't go from Ratcliffe and Jassim not succeeding to no sale. It would go from Ratcliffe and Jassim being ruled out, then the strategic alternatives being considered, and then a decision between strategic alternatives versus no sale, and then a relisting of the football club, no doubt, at a later date. And we have to wait and see. I think we don't want to scaremonger at this point.
No.
But all that said, I would say there is confusion over the structure of the two groups and what they bid on April the 28th. So at the time of recording, we know that Sheikh Jassim has tabled an offer, and that offer includes a valuation for the club and strategic investment. And then things get a little bit complicated. And this number of £5 billion is accurate to my understanding. And the initial assumption is that there is pledged investment, but it is unclear whether that pledged investment is part of the 5 billion or whether it is 5 billion plus pledged investment. And at this point, if we look at likelihood of winning, and if we look at the logic of how a bid would be framed, you would have to say, to succeed, it would need to be a club valuation of £5 billion with, as I reported earlier today, 0.8 billion, which is $1 billion of extra pledged investment. And the Manchester United debt is factored into all of this as well. Because obviously, if the number was 5 billion with the pledged investment as part of it, it means the actual offer to get the Glazers part of the club is much lower than we anticipated, because the overall number is inflated by the pledged investment. So we need to be a little bit cautious at this stage, although it would be logical, and I don't want to scaremonger here. So I want to point out that sources close to the 9-2 Foundation are adamant, they're confident, their bid is competitive, they've improved their offer slightly. So we can stick to all of that. But there is still just a little bit of digging needed and a little bit of clarity as to the exact structure and whether it is 5 billion plus pledged investment in pounds, or whether it's actually $5 billion and $1 billion in investment, and $6 billion is around 5 billion. So still that number, but it's all in. And this is important because the pledged investment is essential to the football club, but it's not essential to the sale process. And by that, what I mean is that when you're in, anyone that takes over is going to have to invest, whether that's the Glazers, whether that's Jassim, whether that's Radcliffe, whether that's somebody else. But you do that after you come in. And whereas with the Chelsea sale, which was atypical, Roman Abramovich tried to protect Chelsea by forcing contractually pledged investment on top of the base sale price. That is not part of this process. So it's all very well saying you're going to pledge something, and it's admirable and it's vital. But Jim Ratcliffe hasn't done that in this offer, but he's also going to pledge something because everybody knows that it's essential and vital. So what is key in this, and I can't stress this enough, is only the 100% club valuation. And by that, I mean, the way the process works in final offer is you must put down a number for 100% of the club. And that includes the minority investors. When you put down that number for 100% of the club, if you are successful in your Sheikh Jassim, you get 69% to begin with. And then you proceed to try and get the other 31%. And in all likelihood, because you valued 100% of the club, most minority stakeholders will go for that valuation as well, which is why Sheikh Jassim is confident of delisting the public shares and getting to 100%. It's not guaranteed, but it is very likely. If the price is good enough for the Glazers, it will be good enough for the minority shareholders. But what that means is if you're hearing 5 billion, that's not what the Glazers are getting, which is often misunderstood. They're getting 69% of that number, which in this case is 3.45 billion or something. I'll have got the maths wrong, but 70% of 5 billion or almost is what the Glazers will get. And that is very important to understand. And it's exactly the same for Jim Ratcliffe. If Sir Jim Ratcliffe has tabled £5 billion for 100% of the club, and then he only wants 50% of the Glazers shares to get a controlling stake, then what he pays is not 5 billion. It is only half of that. And I think people fail to understand that when they're banding around these offers. So therefore, if Sheikh Jassim has bid 5 billion for 100% of the club, it's a highly competitive offer. But if that 5 billion was to include in it the pledged investment, it suddenly is likely, if not definitely, and here's the twist, going to be a lower offer than Ratcliffe. And what Ratcliffe did last night was only make an offer as the process demanded for 100% of the club. And he asked within that offer structurally for it to be for control, which would mean that he would take just over 50% in likelihood. The Glazers, Joel and Avram, would stay and have about 20%, but they would lose their Class B voting power and become standard minority investors.
So the dual share structure gets changed, right? The dual share structure would have to go out the window for that offer to be accepted.
Yeah, and look, it's not impossible to have a scenario where there is a demand from two of the Glazers to maintain the voting power. And this would be especially applicable, obviously, with any kind of minority investor where the whole point is for the Glazers to stay in control, or the whole point is for four of the Glazers to go and the other two Glazers, as per the Apollo deal, to try and take their shares. Then we're still in this Class B territory because there's a mechanism whereby if the family are changing shares between them, they can be protected. And if they stay at the club, they can be protected with Class B voting power. But the point here is that's all irrelevant, because even if that mechanism exists, Ratcliffe is saying in his offer, if you do business with me, you surrender that, there is a new structure, and I have the control. In other words, I'm not looking for a majority stake, I'm looking for control. And if you therefore stay with 20% but have close to 78% of the voting power, that is not something I'm prepared to do. So the only way that the Ratcliffe structure will succeed is if the Glazers, should two of them stay, which is one of the options that we believe is on the table, the only way that that will succeed is if the two Glazers that remain decide they will surrender their power and that they want a minority investment in the football club without the voting power. But remember another key point, which has been forgotten, that I've said many times. The option on the table from Jim Ratcliffe is flexible. And what that means is once you've got 100% club valuation, in theory, he could say dealer's choice. So if the Glazers do want to leave or don't go for that option, it may still be that Ratcliffe comes back and says, I'll take the 69%. And then again, if his offer is higher than Sheikh Jassim, this might be a cleaner transaction and a less alarming one as far as Manchester United fans are concerned. So we've got to be really careful because Ratcliffe is flexible and he's looking for control at all costs, which might be 69, which might be 50 and the Glazers staying. And Jassim is looking to win and only do so with 100% of the club. And this again is why the structure of Jassim is important. So everyone's just saying 5 billion. And there is a logical assumption, because this is what sources are indicating, that it's a competitive 5 billion offer, so nothing to be alarmed about. And it's above the enterprise value. And it may well be the highest offer. And there is pledged investment on top. But I want to be really clear here. There are sources, whether out of reality or whether out of gamesmanship to try and change the narrative and drive up the price, that are intimating that maybe the pledged investment is falsely boosting the overall price. And if that is the case, the club valuation part, which is the only part that matters, may be lower. So there's a very intriguing debate. Who's higher, Ratcliffe or Jassim? We've always started with the premise, and logically, because sources have indicated that in a straight race, Jassim will win. But I would say there is some doubt cast over that. But I've got to be fair and balanced to all the sides that I'm talking to. There's no panic on the Jassim side. There's confidence. They are saying, this is our offer. This is our pledged investment.
They've always had confidence, haven't they?
But there's other sources now that are starting to question, why is the pledged investment there? And is it not only being used to mask the fact that the overall number seems high, but the club valuation is maybe not as high as has been previously reported. So
But
when I
Ben,
learn more on that, I'll let you know. But I don't think it's fair and responsible journalism at this point to scaremonger. I'm presenting what I know, and it's a fluid and evolving situation.
so just some quick maths I've been doing whilst we've been talking. If I'm correct, Joel and Avram hold around about 40 million shares. The other four Glazers hold around about 72 million. And on the public market, there's around about 50 million. So in total, there's around about 163 million shares in Manchester United. Now, if you look at a valuation of let's just hypothetically do this nice and simply. There's 5 billion. That would give a per share value of $37. Now, Manchester United closed on the market last night at just shy of $21. So you can see the premium. The other 31%, of course, they're taking that, right? That's kind of just what I wanted to make it clear to the viewers. This is what I mean about the Glazers' valuation of Manchester United has always been frankly outrageous. It is not worth anywhere near 5 billion, not even let alone 6 billion. But this is the game they're playing because they know they've got the golden goose, and they might not have fed it, and it might be starving, but it's still the golden goose.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I learned though that perhaps was intriguing, and we've said this many times, that there's a bluff on all sides. The groups trying to buy the club are obviously doing so and pushing for the lowest possible number and the best possible value. And if there isn't a high frequency of bidders, and if every bidder's got a different structure, those that are confident that they have the best offer, whether it's the highest or the most preferential structure, can stick to their guns because they've got no real direct rivals. The closest thing we've got to a head-to-head is between Jassam and Ratcliffe, but in many ways, they're still very different. So the bidders would always be able to, in many ways, be able to just use the fact that the Glazers don't want to leave empty-handed and maintain their valuation. And then on the other side, you have this supposed £6 billion, which is the magic number, but that's never been confirmed. So the Glazers have got the opportunity throughout this process to bluff a little bit and to put a high number out there to create competitive tension. And we'll wait and see. If they sell for 6 billion, then they were right all along. But if they sell for less than 6 billion, then they were bluffing and they've come down. And if they don't sell at all, then perhaps they do think they can get 6 million and they're unhappy with the offers. And that might sound common sense, but it's worth outlining the options. But one little twist that I've heard, which I think is quite key, is that 6 billion is a myth. And it's really more a sliding scale between about $7 and $8 billion, which sounds like, again, a massive extreme. There's $1 billion difference. That's 3 times Newcastle United. But again, at the lower end, 6 billion is about 4.8 billion pounds, $6 billion. And that lower end, I feel, is being used as the starting point. Because if you look at the indicative offers and the second round offers, we know that they were in and around that ballpark, 4.5 billion and maybe a little bit north. So the starting point, therefore, to actually talk to credible suitors is somewhere in that ballpark, which, again, as I said before, is going to be very interesting because if all along Qatar have had pledged investment plus their offer as a bulked number, then their club valuation is lower than that. And I'm not saying, again, this is definite, but there is a theory that the Qatar offer may be aggregating all its different aspects to inflate itself higher than the reality. The counterpoint is that will be denied by those close to the 9-2 Foundation. So we have to wait and see. There's games going on even beyond the final deadline. But that's the lowest number. And intriguingly, I'm told that the scale would go more up to $7 billion, which would come to about 5.6 billion. So not quite 6 billion. And this, again, if accurate and it transpires, it tells you that 6 to 7 billion pounds is the number that's been touted, but actually 5 to 6 billion pounds is the reality of the situation. So when we get now to these bids, it may be the Glazers, if they choose to proceed with a group, that are the ones that come down in price. So I don't think we can hold the Glazers to account here. And there's so many parts of their ownership of the football club that has been unpopular, and rightly so. So there's all manner of ways you can bash the Glazers. But trying to sell a football club in under 9 months and get the highest possible price is not one of them. They are perfectly entitled to appoint a group, sit back, assess options, create competitive tension, get this done. If we're only talking about months, I know we've had twists, I know it's been very public, but it's under 9 months. It's a quick takeover. It's a respected group running it. And ultimately, if they get their price and it's a high price and it's above the odds, fair play to them. That's what anyone would do, whether you're selling a car or selling a house. And if they're bluffing and they come down and they don't get the price that they want, then it will have been frustrating and it will have been gamesmanship. But that's what you do when you're selling something. So I don't think the way the Glazers are handling the competitive tension is atypical. I think it's highly frustrating to the fan base, but I also think it's very normal for this type of transaction.
Yeah, but when you're involved in it from a fan perspective, it pisses you off. Of course it does. And that I want to quickly also talk to you, Ben, because we've just spoken in a little bit of detail about Sheikh Jassim's offer and also Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos. Actually, no, we didn't. There's something I want to ask you about the Jim Ratcliffe offer, which I'll get back to, but minority investment, because that's still a side conversation, right, which we can't ignore. As much as I'd love to ignore the concept, what happened in terms of any minority investment offers going in on deadline day? Did anybody come forward? And what were the structure of those offers, if you do know?
Well, there were none because there was no deadline, which was another thing that I reported yesterday. The April 28th deadline was solely there for the two groups looking for either outright or a controlling stake. So Carlisle, Sixth Street, Elliott, and others are waiting. They've been invited to bid again, but they've been told that there's a stage before them, which is to deal with and either accept or rule out the two main groups looking for either outright or the controlling stake in the club, in the case of Sir Jim Ratcliffe. And that is a telling indication, again, that the Glazers are determined sellers. Yeah. And if the price isn't hit, we then revert back to strategic alternatives. And this is why they've not been rejected, because there is still a possibility that they may come into the club in some capacity. But first and foremost, the number one priority is to deal with Jassim and Ratcliffe and either move one forwards or rule them both out. And if one is moved forwards, then it again tells you that the strategic alternatives are back burner options. Otherwise, they would have had the chance to enter the process now. And if nothing comes of these two bids because the Glazers' valuation or structure hasn't been met, then we move into that scenario that I said before of we can rule out the possibility of a full sale. And then we have to start talking about this in terms of minority investment, strategic investment, or financing, or a no sale. And then within that context, you have Carlisle, who debt finance the purchase of Atalanta by Steve Paliuca. So that would be a preferred equity model. In other words, they would come in, they would put capital in return for equity, and 4 of the Glazers would probably go and 2 of them would stay. But the key difference is, unlike in the Ratcliffe bid, the 2 that remain would have more control than ever, as opposed to becoming minority investors in a Jim Ratcliffe-led and controlled club. With Elliott, they're looking for small common equity with financing on top. And it's very similar with Sixth Street and some of the other financiers as well. Some want a small minority stake and financing. Some just want financing. And all of these, by the way, are prepared to work with other groups too. So there is technically a scenario where Ratcliffe, less so with Jassim, because I think the expectation is they'd find a way to find the money if they really want it. But there's a possibility. Let's just say, hypothetically, neither group has the financing. I know that feels less unthinkable with Sheikh Jassim, but let's wait and see. There's a possibility where the Rain Group and the Glazers say, you have to find X amount more. And by the way, we've got Carlisle or Elliott or Sixth Street that are willing to help you. That's one option. Or those groups work directly with the Glazers. And in that scenario, you have different structures and different levels of finances, but every single minority group or financer at the moment did nothing on the 28th of April. They're in the process, but they are not currently being treated as a priority. And I don't want to build that as plan B. I want to build that as working out first, because the Glazers are determined sellers, whether any of the two groups, Jassim and Ratcliffe, can get something done. And if they can't, then do they need help of somebody else in the process? Or are the Glazers going to partner instead with someone else in the process? Or are they going to say no sale and put the club up for sale in the future to try and get the number that they want? And that will obviously be the worst case scenario. And I'm not saying
it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any logical sense, Ben. Does it make any logical sense, Ben? Because the value of Manchester United will now not be increasing anymore without investment. We've reached a point where no investment, the legacy value of Manchester United, as they like to call it, we haven't won the league since 2012-13. We haven't won the Champions League since 2008. I know that we're better now under Ten Hag, but without investment, the value of Manchester United will not go up. So this concept, the idea of a no sale, let's wait a year and then we could try and sell it for a little bit more, that's not really based in logic, is it?
I mean, it could be, because the Glazers, first and foremost, could feel like regular Champions League football and winning things and having a few successful years will add to the value of the club. They could be prepared to invest in Old Trafford. I know people will say, whose money? But this is where the finances come in. So don't be surprised if it's effectively a no sale, but with an element of either financing or commercial partner that keeps the dynamic as is, largely keeps the siblings, or certainly two of them, as is, but gives enough capital to do the things they feel they want to do to significantly raise the value. And there's an element of idealism and narcissism in it. I agree. The maths doesn't appear to add up. And that is probably why at this stage, the focus is on Jassim and Ratcliffe. But if we're talking hypothetically, and the Glazers found a small amount of money through whatever partnership, and that capital was used to modernize the football club, and they were prepared to find money. And I know this is a worry because it all feels like more debt. It all feels like more problems. It all feels like more risk. It all feels like more financial fair play liabilities. And it all feels like spend and hope and pray and rely and then let's see. But there is that element of idealism. And in fairness, the Glazers may just call it a business plan. And if, for example, they think, and I'm only putting things out there as options because I know that they come with money. So don't take this answer as Ben Jacobs said there's going to be a Super League, or Ben Jacobs said that they're going to sell their soul to X, Y, or Z. But again, if you stay for 5 more years, what could happen? In theory, a Super League could happen. In theory, Premier League rights could go through the roof. In theory, Manchester United could win, let's hope it's this one, 5 straight Champions Leagues. In theory, they could stabilize through spending in each window and then get great academy players and find their transfer fees are not investments and have to spend less. In theory, they could reduce the wage bill. In theory, they could do the Old Trafford thing themselves. And each of these could bring money, money, money. And this is where the Super League was such a threat, because the joining bonus for the Super League was 1 billion per club. So if you're the Glazers, regardless of the fact the Super League was highly unpopular, the Glazers are highly unpopular. They clearly don't mind being unpopular. So if they get their billion through something like that, the Club World Cup that is expanded, which is Gianni Infantino's brainchild, is going to bring in a load of cash. So with every thing like that, an extra game is an extra commercial opportunity, an extra chance for brand growth. So again, don't get me wrong. Each of these is reliant on a risk-reward strategy. And look at Barcelona. They spent a load of money by activating levers, and the risk-reward was, we got to win something, and they went out the Champions League. So they'll win La Liga, but they're still not in a healthier position. Bringing Messi back is risk-reward. And this is where the Glazers are in trouble, because if they stay, they've either got to borrow, or they've got to partner, or they've got to spend in a way that has an element of upfront risk. But again, the narcissistic element, the idealistic element is more around. If it works, there is a chance with a new stadium, with Champions League football, with a great women's team, with a manager that's stable, that the club is worth X. And if X in their mind is, let's just say, 8 billion, and now it's 6 billion, then they'll feel like, even in a worst case scenario, if we stay for 5 more years, get a bit of financing, get a minority partner, when we put it up for sale in 5 years, we'll still make another billion or $1.5 billion or 2 billion more than now in a worst case scenario. And then if we have to go for that number, even if it's not quite the 10 billion that we want, we'll have left the club in better shape and will have made more money. So when I spell that out, I understand that it sounds like a fanciful fairy tale that cannot work in theory because of who the Glazers are, because of their lack of commitment to the club, because of where the club is, because of some of the foundational problems, and because ultimately, how can you do it if you're putting the club at risk in the first place because you don't have the money? So I understand that. The Glazers may have other ideas.
You know what I've just realised is what you've just spoken there for the last couple of minutes is exactly the sort of conversation that the Rain Group, I know, that would have been having with Sheikh Jassim in the sale talks Manchester United. I said, look, hypothetically, we could stay and we could do all this and it'll be worth so much more. These are the conversations they would have been having. And then the 9-2 Foundation and probably Jim Ratcliffe and anyone else are like, really? I mean, I don't know, you could do that, but you're not going to, are you? I want to also quickly reverse back to Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos, because the story broke this week in the build-up to the final deadline of Jim Ratcliffe allowing or structuring a bid that allows Joel and Abraham to stay. Do we have any clarification as to whether Ineos submitted different types of bids, or one bid that included 69% and every Glazer leaving, or another bid separately that was 50% with Joel and Abraham staying on? Did they submit multiple bids?
Those close to Ineos are coy. I said this even 2 weeks ago. The official line is that they're under NDA and that they cannot discuss figures or structures. And obviously everyone's under NDA, so all of the groups are saying relatively similar things. But as journalists, we try and develop sources and find out things, and you often get clarity. And with Ratcliffe in particular, he hasn't been afraid to go on record and he hasn't been afraid to issue statements. We saw it with Chelsea. We saw it when he announced his bid. And we even saw it before the process for the sale started, when, of course, he did that interview with the Financial Times. But now it's more tight-lipped, which tells you that they think they stand a chance. And of course they do, or they wouldn't be in the process. You don't go in with a lack of confidence at this level and say, I'm going to drop between 4.5 and 5 billion if I think it's just a waste of time. But it was telling, wasn't it, that Ratcliffe even spoke a few weeks back in an interview about how I'm not going to pay over the odds and I'm not going to be reckless. And Sheikh Jassim has said the same thing. So my understanding is that the Ratcliffe bid is for control. That's the most important thing. And I know the original statement said majority, but I wouldn't focus on majority. I would focus on control, because that tells you that the non-negotiable part in all of this is that if he takes 50 or more, the Glazers cannot keep their Class B shares and voting power. It would have to be a new structure. And if it's all 69, it's all 69. But Ratcliffe has never wanted to pay more than he has to. It's about control, which is why I think he won't try and get 100% of the club, because that's an extra billion or so to get the extra 31%. Maybe obviously even a little bit more. In the enterprise value, a third of the club is about $1 billion, but 31% of the club, if you're valuing the club at 6 billion, is a little bit more. You've got to drop somewhere close to 2 billion. And I just think he feels like if you've got the control of the football club, why do you need to pay that extra 2 billion? And he may feel like if the Glazers, two of them anyway, Joel and Avram, want to stay, why pay more than he has to as long as he gets control? So
yeah, I suppose it minimizes risk, doesn't it?
Well, it minimizes risk, but it maximizes risk because you're going into business with the Glazers. And because you didn't say that in your statement, it feels like a U-turn. And Ratcliffe may come out and say it was always the plan. So I would be wary of post-sale narrative, because everybody is going to say it was the highest bid, it was the best bid, it was always the plan. And that is just what happens. It's the same with transfers as well. The politics goes out the window and you always learn the neater narrative afterwards. And this is the key thing to understand. If Ratcliffe wins, it can't be because the Glazers wanted to stay. It has to be because the Glazers wanted to invest in Manchester United in a minority way, and because Ratcliffe tabled the highest offer. Because if there's any indication that Jassim outbid Ratcliffe and Ratcliffe still won, the fan base are going to go nuts and say, how on earth did you turn down the highest offer just to stay? That's greedy. It's counterproductive.
Oh, yeah, it's pure Glazers, though. I honestly, I've got a bit of a nasty feeling, just a gut instinct that might be the case.
But they won't say that.
If there are two offers on the table, and one of them allows them to stay and retain some control, that's going to really, really appeal to them. Maybe even a little bit more so than a higher bid, because the concept of keeping their 20% and then in 5 years' time that now being worth significantly more, it's worth turning down a higher bid now because you're going to get more in the future.
Yeah, but I think this is also just coming back to something I said in the very first show. The S in Glazers is hugely important, and we keep forgetting there are siblings set of 6. So if we look at it logically, 4 want to leave, and an offer of 5 billion is probably good enough for them. That's just my opinion, but an offer of 5.5 billion is definitely good enough for them, and something in between is probably good enough for them. Again, just my opinion without speculating over specifics. So if Joel and Avram want to stay, then if they stay with their current shares, then this becomes a sale between 4 siblings that want out and a group that wants to come in. And actually, in many ways, Joel and Avram Glazer have got nothing to do with it if that scenario and that structure is what materializes. And I stress if, because there's all kinds of different options. And then the only thing that Joel and Avram would have to agree to, which is why they'd still be part of the deal, is that they're not going to stay in the current structure with their Class B shares. They're going to revert back to less powerful shares and take a standard percentage that sees them become minority owners. So they're agreeing to a different dynamic in return, as you say, for holding out for longer. And then when they come to sell their 20%, it will be worth more. And also, Radcliffe could have the opportunity to buy that 20% or so off them at a future date, whether optionally or out of obligation. And that would be a laddered element to it. But at the time it's bought, maybe the valuation is higher. Or there's no opportunity to do that. And at some point, Joel and Avram are going to cash in on their 20%, but they're going to wait because they firmly believe that the club will be higher. But then you're in a situation where they have to believe in Radcliffe and that he will get value out of the club, because if they don't like what Manchester United Football Club is doing and they want to protect their 20%, they'll have far less control. So there's sort of a variety of moving parts in all of this. And I would say that still the family aspect is vital, because if Joel and Avram have decided we're staying at all costs, then at this point, Sheikh Jassim is out the race. And if Joel and Avram haven't decided and it's all based on the number tabled, then we need to determine what the true number is tabled. Because as I said to you earlier in the podcast, there is a competing narrative between sources I'm talking to as to whether it is a competitive number plus pledged investment or whether it is pledged investment. Can't even say it anymore.
Tough thing to say.
Pledged investment.
You went
there.
We
You
go.
go. I apologize. I think everyone's brain is fried though. So that is a summary of how we all feel after the last few months. But it's whether it is that pledged investment within the number or on top of the number. And one with it on top is a very strong offer. And one with it included is arguably a slightly misleading offer.
Just something I've just been thinking about. When it comes to public companies and takeover bids, like Twitter, for example, when it came in, Elon Musk came in, bought it, delisted and bought the company, and it turned into a private company. And I think I don't know what I think there was an obligation for people to sell their shares back in at that price. Is there any sort of obligation that exists inside because if you're looking at the Glazer family, you're right, it's 6 siblings, right? So 4 over 2, quick maths, that's a majority. Is there any sort of obligation, or can 2 just block the 4? Because there must be something sort of written into the structure of that ownership to stop that.
There may be. I think it remains.
You think so? You think so? The logic would kind of tell you that there should be something written in there. Otherwise, you might just get one angry sibling that blocks 5 for an entire lifetime, which would, well, it wouldn't make sense.
Well, I think if some go and some stay, then the ones that stay probably have some kind of approval and consent. And this is why if Joel and Avram stay, even though they're not the ones receiving money, if it's only 4 other siblings being bought out, we have to understand what power they have over the whole family. And if they say the offer is that we can stay, but we have to surrender our Class B shares, we're not comfortable with that, and then the 4 other siblings say we want to sell, can Sir Jim Ratcliffe just do a direct deal with the 4 other siblings, and as a consequence Joel and Avram get boxed out? Or do Joel and Avram respond and say, do that deal, we're not in favor of it, but we're now not going to change our Class B voting rights, and you can't do anything to stop us? And as a consequence, Sir Jim Ratcliffe would be the one that walks away, because he'd say, cool, I've got 4 siblings that want to sell, but I've got 2 siblings that are not prepared to change the voting power, which means I don't have control of the club, so I'm going to walk away. So I think that it'd be unfair of me to speculate over the terms between the family.
Yeah, that it is speculation here at this point. It was just a curious kind of concept that just crossed my mind.
But what I would say is it is highly, highly likely whatever happens will have family unity, which means that they will make a decision as a 6, which means therefore, even if there's politics and pressure and disagreement and debate, when they come to making a decision over the coming days or week, then I don't think there will be an argument. I think there will be a unity. There may have been an argument, there may have been a debate, but I think whatever they do will be as a 6. I don't think we're going to get any, they did it and still 4 of them are not happy, or they did it and 2 of them are unhappy. They're still at the club and they're really quite annoyed by the fact that they've lost all of their power. I think that that's the type of scenario where if 6 are not on the same page, then nothing will happen with either Sheikh Jassim or Sir Jim Ratcliffe, which is again why the Essen Glazers is important. There's 6 of them, and they need to be in agreement as to what they're going to do next.
Well, yeah. So as I said at the very start, and it's kind of it feels apt to sort of finish on this question as well. It's been 6 months since that statement first came out, and we've reached this critical, I suppose, crossroads in it. This is where the Glazers can't hide their hand anymore. They've got to turn them. They have to show what they're doing now. And we're reading the Telegraph from James Ducker and reading from pretty much everyone, suggesting that this is going to be not something that drags on for a full month before nothing is said. We should be expecting to hear something. Let's say by this point, next Saturday, we should know the road that we're going down, whether it's the Sheikh Jassim, whether it's Jim Ratcliffe, or whether it's this minority investment. We should know within the week, shouldn't we?
We certainly should know the hand, in the sense of there'll be either a preferred bidder, Jassim or Ratcliffe, and then it's obvious that the Glazers are departing, either in a controlling sense or an absolute sense, or alternatively, they'll reject them both. But I think that it all just depends upon the number, the true number, not the speculation, not the mixed messaging, the number. And if it is still significantly below the valuation the Glazers are looking for, then they will explore other options, either through gamesmanship and asking the groups to increase, or through trying to pair them, particularly Ratcliffe, with another partner, or just going their own route. So the only caveat to what you've said is if they pick one of Jassim or Ratcliffe, and that is a very realistic scenario, then it will move quickly, because a lot of the due diligence has been done and both those groups are desperate to get in by the time the window opens. It's vital, in fact, to both Ratcliffe and Jassim. But if it doesn't go according to plan with either of those two, that's when I think the timescale becomes a bit more uncertain, because under any scenario, at least from the groups we know of, that isn't Jassim or Ratcliffe, the Glazers are still in charge. And if they're still in charge, then whether or not an investor comes in today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, it shouldn't, in theory, affect the summer window, because there's not really a transition. it will affect the mood, and it will affect comparatively the window, because there's a presumption that Ratcliffe and Jassim may spend more than the Glazers. But then it's more about Manchester United need Champions League football. If they get Champions League football and the Glazers are still the controlling owner, then they're going to spend. And if with Champions League football they need to bolster, they're going to spend more than without Champions League football. So I think that the need to get in and move fast is about completing the process for either Jassim or Ratcliffe, because it's a change and it has to be done before the window opens, or Erik ten Hag is in a difficult position. His first transfer window and summer was overshadowed by Ronaldo. His second transfer window in a summer would be overshadowed by takeover uncertainty. And that means in the first 2 weeks of the window, whose money is he spending? So you're going to miss out on targets, or you're going to have to delay deals, and that will bleed into the pre-season because players might be arriving later. If the Glazers are still in charge, carnage, chaos, doom, gloom, outrage, but
protests.
But the one silver lining, I don't even want to call it a silver lining, the one thing that is smoother is just that they will go into that window as they have any other window. And if they have said they're staying, then they would be nuts not to back their manager, because however unpopular it is, they've basically said they're staying for the long term. So then if it has Champions League, that's when you start saying, well, at least we know whose money we're spending. And then it becomes, I think, upon Ten Hag to, after all this uncertainty, make it clear to the Glazers, sporting director, and what is my budget? And let's spend it quickly and early. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get a Kane and Osimhen, of Vlahovic, or anyone else on the market, because every single one of these players will be attracted to Manchester United because it's about Ten Hag. It's about momentum. It's about the new era. Nobody, in my opinion, at the football club is saying no to Manchester United as a player because Avram and Joel Glazer in particular are still in charge. I just don't buy that that's a reality. They're saying no to Manchester United because they're not being paid the wages, or in Rashford's case, they're not being given the right terms for renewal. So the Glazers are not really impacting players. They're impacting mood. They're impacting foundations. They're impacting modernization. They're impacting stock price. They're impacting brands. And when you add all of that up, they have to go if you're looking at it in those terms. But if their belief is the right offer's not on the table, then they need to rip off that bandage and make it clear that this process is either over or is ending with a different type of investment. So again, they can enter into the window.
Please be over. Please be over.
Well, maybe it will be.
No offense, Ben, but I don't want another
we're not saying it's not over. We're simply saying that as journalists, we have to be responsible, and there are still multiple options on the table.
I know.
But if you're Harry Kane,
I'm speaking from like an emotional, not an emotional fan perspective, but just from a fan perspective. I hope it's over. I hope that this is the watershed moment. This is something that we waited nearly 20 years for, and we're closer than we ever have been before, and still it feels far away.
But if you're Harry Kane, say, then as long as you know from a recruitment and club perspective whose money you're spending, and as long as the club come to you early, if he doesn't sign at Spurs, you can pounce. But I think the worry is that if Manchester United lose the build-up to the window and the window itself, then every other club in a race for a top player, and you've got to assume that every race Manchester United run will have another suitor, that player may say, I don't even know whether they've got the funds for me. I don't even know if they'll move for me. I don't know when they're going to move for me. And another club may be saying to the same player, we can basically agree and negotiate right now, and you can sign and you can be in tomorrow and you can move into your new house and you can have 2 weeks off and you can come back and we're going to America for pre-season. So we're a more stable option. And this again is why everything, one way or the other, needs to be resolved, but especially if it's to be a new incoming outright or controlling owner.
Yes, but there's, in my opinion, it's kind of a mute conversation to really speak in depth about transfers because you don't know who the bloody owners are. And until the owners are resolved, there's no point going in depth in these. But Ben...
No, but the recruitment team are planning as normal.
Of course, I know, but they're planning with two different owners. They're planning if the Glazers stay and they're planning if the Glazers go.
Well, I don't think necessarily they're planning with Champions League football and without Champions League football. And they know that if they make Champions League football, there'll be a windfall. And I know that fans will say they won't invest, but I think it is a bit different between last summer and January, when there was always this feeling of outgoing. If the Glazers commit to staying, then they must back Ten Hag. And if they commit to staying and say, you still can't have any money in a transfer window, even with Champions League football, then I think every single person on the red half of Manchester will, instead of protesting and abusing and telling them that they have to exit, start actually grabbing a genuine, real pitchfork or torch and lighting it and standing outside of Old Trafford until the Glazers next come, or flying over to them in America and actually physically forcing themselves out of the club. Because you cannot have an owner after, and you shouldn't have an owner before, by the way, either, but you cannot have an owner afterwards that has a viable opportunity through one way or the other to bring in investment, whether they stay or whether they go, and then end that process again, whether they stay or whether they go. And if in this context they stay and they say, sorry, there's no money to spend, even though we potentially won multiple trophies, we qualified for Champions League football, and everything is moving on the football field in the right direction, and now your manager wants a traditional number 9. And to get that traditional number 9, you need 100+ million for Osimhen, you need 75 million for Vlahovic, you need 100+ million for Kane, and you're still probably going to need a goalkeeper, even if De Gea signs of some sort. You're going to need potentially a right back, and you might need something in midfield. So that spend, even if the other players are economical, is going to be something in the region of, I think, 200 million. And even that may not be enough for the players that I've outlined. And if you add that up based on other window spends that, yes, Manchester United have had in the past, and if you add that up based on the last summer spend, which was obviously higher than they budgeted for, and if you add that up based on what is becoming the norm, like it or loathe it, for Big Six clubs, then...
Not just Big Six, Nottingham Forest spent 150 million. Nottingham Forest spent 150 million. But Ben, it is exhausting.
So I think they have to commit to that. And
I know they have to commit to that, but the Glazers don't. This is exactly why we've reached this.
But they have in the past. I mean, I know people don't like the Glazers,
they've given a drunk. They've given a. I always use that analogy. It's like giving a drunk dude a wallet and expecting him to go into the shop and actually buy the shopping you need for the week. No, sod that. He's just going to buy Cheetos and more beer because he's drunk. He doesn't know what he's doing.
To an extent, I get it, because people look at the last window, the summer one, and they say the high-end Prosecco was supposed to be Frankie de Jong, and as a consequence of not getting him, they pivoted. And yes, they made a phenomenal signing in Casemiro, but maybe it wasn't as planned for. And then they brought in somebody later down the line like Weghorst. But, you know, there's two sides to every story.
I mean more if you're looking over the last 10 years of Ed Woodward and the signings that we've made. And we spent over $1 billion and we've just wasted it. So sorry.
Is that the Glazers' fault, or is that the recruitment?
Yes, because of course it's the Glazers' fault. Ed Woodward was the man that they trusted and just put in charge, and they were like, "Yeah, all right, he's telling us the numbers are good. All right, go on and keep doing what you're doing." And he catastrophically wasted money because he was not fit for the job.
But I suppose what I'm saying is, and by the way, I'm not in any way defending anybody. I'm trying to just add a bit of balance. That
I'm not.
The only way that the Glazers as owners would be culpable, in my opinion, is if there were countless scenarios, and maybe they were, so I'm asking you because you'll know better than I will.
Yeah.
Over the last 10 years, if there was 10 signings, one every year, that everybody on the football side wanted, the player wanted to come, and on each occasion, the Glazers basically said, that's too expensive, it's a no, find the cheaper option, and as a consequence, they still bought, but they consistently would not stump up for viable targets. But if
the perfect example
hasn't happened, then the Glazers are less at fault than the recruitment team, in my opinion.
The perfect example of that one would be David Moyes' only summer when we chased, I think it was Cesc Fabregas and Gareth Bale all summer. We wouldn't stump up the cash for either of them, and we ended up with Marouane Fellaini on deadline day. That's the perfect. There are countless other examples, but shit, let's not talk about that because that'll be another hour and a half conversation.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm not saying in any way that
I know you're not.
View on that is a defense. I'm just asking the question because I am only looking at it through the Frankie de Jong thing because I was covering that transfer window. And I know everyone thought that Manchester United were culpable, but as we now see in hindsight, the player just didn't want to leave. So it's not necessarily the fault of the club not showing enough ambition. Perhaps they tried and got frustrated, and like many clubs do, got screwed over by the Barcelona machine, who played De Jong, played Chelsea, played Manchester United. The player always said he wanted to stay, and he stayed. I get there's two sides, but I think that in essence, it's just really important in many ways to understand, and I'm asking the question, I'm not giving an opinion,
I know
whether or not this is the Glazers who have repeatedly turned down targets that were right and were value and they didn't want to spend the money, or whether the recruitment team and or managers have just got things wrong time after time after time and have spent the Glazers' money badly.
I would say that all of those things are correct at the exact same time. That's what I would say. And the less we talk about Manchester United's past transfer failures, the better. Because I think this summer was good. We overspent, and from an operational perspective, there was a lot that we needed to improve. But hey, Ben, thank you so much again for your time. I honestly, I really, really appreciate the fact that you give your time here. This community loves you. I love having these chats, and you've really helped me through this process. Because it's, as you said earlier, it's a kind of your brain gets a bit fried, but fingers crossed by this. No, it's not really a fingers crossed now. By this point next Saturday, we should have clarity on the exact road we're going down as Manchester United fans. I think that's the thing that we can say with confidence. We can't say with confidence which road that's going to be, but I can say with some confidence, we should know what the Glazers really are going to do. And I hope it's to sell the club in full. I really, really do, Ben. But as I said, always, thank you very, very much for your time today, man.
Pleasure. We will come on again when we have a preferred candidate or a winner for show number 10. I'll look forward to it.
Well, if it is a preferred candidate and it's Sheikh Jassim or it's Jim Ratcliffe, we know they're selling, then we're going to have champagne up in here. We are getting champagne.
I like it.
We're going to get drunk, Ben. We're going to get drunk.
Well, I mean, I'm notorious for talking for about 99% of these and boring everyone to death. So if there's champagne, I can assure you that I will be drinking for 99% and you will have to do the majority.
That would be talking. A really crap podcast because I wouldn't be speaking much. Well, look, thank you very much, dude. Have a cracking weekend. And as I said, I hope by this time next week, we've got something really positive to speak about.
Have a good weekend, everyone. All the best.